Hello everybody and welcome to a lunch and learn session today. My name is Gavin Green and today we're going to go through app layout best practices, how to get it working for desktop and mobile. Let's jump in. So today's session is around responsible app layout. Now, what do I mean by that? So we first need to get some basics. So a responsive web design is creating a web page that looks good on a variety of different devices. Without having to configure them each independently or separately. I need to be able to open it on my desktop, on my tablet, on my phone, and work through it interchangeably as well. So it really is, how does it automatically adjust to different screens as well as to different viewports? We're going to go through some concepts. So when you're configuring for a desktop, you can use all the elements in the toolbox. When you start transitioning over to a tablet or even to an iPhone, you need to start working through some decisions on which design elements to show. Does it make sense to show? Do we need to adjust some of the positioning? How to use the responsive UI configuration inside the app designer. And then we'll also touch on the visibility option. How can we actually make certain features visible on the main desktop view, but how can we hide those that are not relevant on a mobile, as an example? We do have some requirements. You obviously need access to an app designer for this. Highly suggested that you have a mobile device with you, whether it's a tablet, whether it is a phone. This will help you validate the layouts as we go through it. And lastly, but most importantly, is who are the different personas that are going to use the layout that you're configuring. People who are constantly on their phones all the time, people who transition between the two of them. It's good to have a high-level idea of who that persona is, as well as some of the user stories that will help guide you in what's the most important information to show, as well as what can you keep on the desktop, what can you lose as soon as you shrink your real estate onto a browser on a phone. And lastly, what type of skill level are we looking at to configure this and put this together? This is very beginner friendly. It can start going into an intermediate, but it really is focused around beginners getting to understand and work through and know the different concepts as we go through this. If you do have any questions as we're going through this, please post them in the chat as well. We'll collate them and reply to them after the session. If we move into the software, the first thing we want to go to is, how do I actually access the mobile version? How do I log into it? Where can I find it? So we've logged into the app designer here. Top right, you'll see there is a mobile icon. If you click that, it'll bring up a pane. In the pane, you'll see there is a set of different instructions, but there is also a QR code in the middle. If you scan the QR code on either your tablet or your mobile device, it'll ask you to log in the browser and you'll have access to the mobile version. The mobile website is a fully responsive website. It contains the recommendations by default, as well as any of the apps that you've configured in there as well. So first thing you want to do is obviously log in on either your tablet or log in on your mobile device so that you have it handy next to you. You can use the F12 option in a browser to see what it looks like, but it's not a true reflection of a mobile interface. So some of the items in there will still render, like the menu bars, etc. So it's best to have a mobile device with you. It'll allow you to validate the different settings that we have. If I go into a particular app, and I'm going to pick an app that I have available, and I'm going to walk you through some of the different items that we have for it. So this app is initially configured to be available on a desktop. So what that means is we have a Esri map in the middle here. It allows me to interact with it. It allows me to see the information. I can see my asset status. I can see my recommendations, and I've got my equipment That's important to me as well. I have a lot of real estate here. It makes sense to keep this because the persona is interested in indicators lighting up the map. I can see my overall status here. Top right, we're surfacing up the recommendations because they're important, but we're also highlighting equipment requiring maintenance. If I was to leave this UI as it is right now and I was to open it on my mobile, it will attempt to render it exactly like this. And what will happen is everything will start rendering and it'll be squished here, and it just won't look appealing to anyone that is interacting with it. So we need to make some adjustments to that. So how do we actually do that? If I click the pencil, so I have edit access to this particular app, so I can actually go in and make these changes that I'm talking to. Yeah. The first thing is this app is published, so it won't save any of the changes, but I actually don't need to do that. What I will be doing is I'll be making use of these three icons across the top here. As I mentioned, some of the concepts that we want to be going through is how can I use the responsive UI elements here to set up different experiences if I want to, yet I've got exactly the same application. I have exactly the same set of data sources coming in, and I have exactly the same set of rules that I may have configured on this particular app as well for it. The first thing looking at this is obviously you have a lot of different layout options here. On a desktop, it would make sense to keep an Esri map. If I go and look at the blocks, you will see there's a lot of different components in here as well for it. If we look at the layout options, the next question to go through is what makes the most sense on a tablet? Can you keep the Esri maps? Yes, you can. You have a lot of real estate there. As you start shrinking to a mobile, you start asking, is it relevant to keep the big Esri map there versus the other information that we're looking at here? So we've got overall asset status, recommendations, and again, we've got equipment requiring maintenance. One of the key questions to answer is who's the audience that's going to consume it on a device versus the desktop? Are they interested in looking at, in this instance, an Esri map, or they're more interested in the recommendations, the overall status, and maybe equipment requiring maintenance as well? So the first thing that we want to do is how can we actually hide some elements from the different renderings? So on a desktop, I want to see everything, but on a mobile device, I actually don't want to see them. The first way we can do that is we can actually make use of if I go up into the box, we can make use of the appearance. There's a visible option. Most likely, when you've configured this, it will say visible is true for most of the apps that you've created. Now, what you'll notice is if I go into the page layers, I can actually see all the different layers that I have configured. And page layers becomes a little important when you are trying to work out the different orientation, what's going to flow above, in the middle, and below as well. If I click on the Esri map itself, can I just hide the Esri map? Yes, you can. There's nothing stopping you from hiding the actual control itself. However, by doing that, you've still got this container that sits around it, and you've still got the heading that's going to show. So you actually don't want to just hide that particular control. What you want to do is you want to have a look at how are the different layers set up in here. So we have a vertical stack layout. You can see as I click on it, on the right in the blue, it's going to highlight everything that is selected for me. If I go to the first box, you'll see that's the one which is containing my Esri map. That's the one that has a heading. That's the one that has a Esri map. That is the one that I actually want to hide if I'm going to view this on a mobile device. So what we want to do is just click that. So we're going to select that. We're then going to go into the block properties. As I mentioned, by default, yours is probably going to be set to true as its normal state. You can go and set this to false. However, it's going to be false on pretty much all three desktop, browser, as well as mobile device. If you click the icon on the left where you see an A, So currently we're in static mode. If I click that once, it's going to turn into dynamic value. If I click that a third time, it's actually going to bring a quick expression up for me as well. If I click into the middle, it's going to bring up the quick expression and allow me to edit it. So if I delete everything that's in there, by default, this is what yours is going to look like if you go into the quick expression. So what we want to do is we want to put a condition in here. We want to put a condition that if the browser is identified as mobile, we want to hide this particular block. If it's not mobile, we want to render it per normal. So first thing we're going to do is under functions, we are going to look under logical. Here is our if statement. On the right, it'll walk you through how you can actually configure that. But for now, if we just double click that, it'll start filling it in for us across the top. If I click into the first area, we're now going to go to constants. Under constants, you'll see a few fields. We have an is mobile and we have an is desktop. Both of these are used specifically to show or hide, or to do various calculations if you want to, or to move things around on the UI in the different modes. If I double click is mobile, it'll fill that in for me. So what we're filling in here is if the render mode is mobile, we want this to not display, so we're going to set that to false. Otherwise, the default is going to be true. If you click out of that, it'll keep that expression configured for you. So as we walk through this, when we open up this app, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to tell this app I'm rendered on a mobile device or I'm rendered on a desktop. If it is rendered on a desktop, it'll render as true. If it's not, it'll set this to false, which means this entire block is not going to render itself. If you were to unpublish this app and save it, you need to open it on your mobile device to be able to view it. I mentioned earlier that you can actually open this up using your F12. Now, for those who are not aware, F12 allows you to view the actual layout of this particular page. And there is an option in here where you can go into it and you can change it to specific. However, this is just an emulation. As you can see here, what it does, it still keeps the heading and it still keeps the bar here. It'll give you a good indication of things which have been made visible and things which are still visible, i.e. not hidden. But you'll notice that you do have a few styling items to work through here. It gives you a good indication. So here you'll see exactly the same form. If I was to switch that off and go back to the main desktop, there is my map view. Here is my overall status, my recommendations, and my equipment requiring maintenance. If I was to go into that and select, for instance, an iPhone, and I was to switch that around, what you'll notice here is some of the styling is not configured, but my map is not actually rendering. So it knows between the different modes when to render something and when not to render something. So the first thing is to identify which of the different, we call them blocks, which of these different components in here should be visible on a mobile or a tablet or a desktop. You may want to change up what you're showing. Instead of showing a map here, you may have another control in mind that you want to make visible when someone is interacting with it on a mobile. The other thing to consider on a mobile is you're very limited on real estate. So the most important thing should be the ones that you see first, less important as you start scrolling down. The same applies on a desktop. It's a good rule of thumb to make sure that the most important things you are trying to illustrate to the end users is across the top. And as you start going down the page, they're still relevant, but the importance is not as great. Now, why am I mentioning that? If we go back into the edit mode here, so we've now hidden the entire Esri map. So the map is now not visible. However, we may want to adjust and move around the remaining elements. So as soon as you open it up, the most important thing's at the top. So how do we do that? Across the top, by default, it'll have the desktop selected. If I was to click the phone, what you'll notice is it actually swaps to a much shorter amount of space that I can configure. But you'll also notice that quite a few of these fields have moved around a bit. So now my Esri map is not top left. It's been adjusted. My equipment requiring maintenance has moved to the top. So if I open this up on a mobile, I get a different visual experience, but it's exactly the same app. So how did we actually do this? If I go to the tablet view, you'll see the tablet view mirrors what we have on the desktop. So if I go back to the desktop view and I go to the tablet view, you'll see they mirror each other. The first thing that we want to do is we want to adjust and move some things around. The reason I picked the tablet view, I've just got more real estate that I can show you the impact of the changes we're going to make. Again, as I mentioned earlier, page layers allows you to move things around. That makes sense. Important to understand is in the layout, if I was to click the vertical stack layout, now what vertical stack layout is if you go to blocks, you'll see under layout, one of these is actually called vertical stack or horizontal stack. If I was to click that and I go to its properties, you'll notice there is no visible option there. They do not have any block property options on them. You need to make sure that if this is something that you do want to move around, shuffle around, make visible or not, it needs to be within a container of sorts, which is why I have the box in here. If I now click the box and I go to its block properties, you'll see I have an appearance. That is what we did with the entire. So if I click the map box, this is the one that we configured that is visible on as well. Now, why is this important? It's important to understand as we're going to adjust some of the flex layout now. We're going to start moving some of the field elements around. What you'll notice is because I've got this selected, my screen is currently split into a 2/3 to 1/3. The one I've got selected is 2/3. If I select the other one, you'll see it's 1/3. If I want to move items around my horizontal layout, I'm going to go to the first one. I'm going to go to the second one. I want to actually put these two fields above my map. So we're hiding the map, so I don't actually need this field anymore. But as soon as you open the phone for the first time, I actually want my equipment requiring maintenance to be right at the top. Currently, it's bottom right. So how do we move that around? If I go to the horizontal and I go to the box 1 and I go to my box 2, again, on the horizontal, we are going to go into the block styling and we're going to go into flex layout. Flex layout allows me to adjust how the different elements react in relation to each other. We do have a video on our YouTube learning channel which goes into a lot more detail around flex. Highly recommend you watch that. We're just going to scratch the surface on flex right now. So what you'll notice here is the direction is going left to right. We're actually going to adjust the direction north to south, top to bottom. So the first thing that you'll notice is we've still got our map, we've still got our overall status, but now instead of that recommendation equipment requiring maintenance being on the right, it's now at the bottom. If you're unsure, we can go back to the desktop view. This is where we started. If I go back into the tablet view, this is where we've got to. So again, what we did is we've gone into the container around those two boxes and we're just adjusting its flex layout. We're just adjusting how these are being rendered in relation to each other. What we can do as well is we can actually reverse that. I'm more interested in equipment requiring maintenance being near the top. Overall asset status, that could be a little bit further down on my page. So we've actually reversed the two of these. Remember, this box in the middle here is going to be hidden as soon as this renders on a tablet in this instance, or on a mobile device. If I go into this box though, so you'll see the horizontal at the top, that's the one that we've adjusted the flex on. So instead of going left to right, we went top to bottom, and then we reversed that, so now bottom to top. If we go into the one box here, I want to do the exact same thing with the items inside it. If I go to its block styling, I'm going to reverse those two as well. So now equipment requiring maintenance is going to be at the top. So that's the first thing I'm going to see as soon as I open my tablet or I open my mobile device. The next thing I'm going to see is a list of recommendations come through there as well. And then the third thing I'm going to see is my overall asset status coming in as well. Now, what you'll notice is as you go back between all the different layouts, it's going to remember what you've configured in the different states. So what this means is, if I go into my chart as an example here, I may want to adjust again the layout of this. I don't want them next to each other, I want them on top of each other. I can go to its block styling here, and again I can set that up. What you'll notice here is I don't have any padding between the two, so if this renders, they're going to render quite squashed on top of each other. We want to give them some breathing room in this as well. So I can click the chart, and if we go to its dimension, I can actually give it a border at the bottom, or we can give it a greater border. So now when it renders, there's some breathing room between the chart as well as the contents underneath it. I can further specify, because we're on mobile, you can be a little bit more restrictive on having the heights of the charts as well. So what should the minimum height of the chart be? But you can also restrict its maximum height as well. If I go back to my desktop view, you'll see here this chart has its desktop properties set. If I go back into my tablet view, you'll see it'll have the tablet property set on it as well. The block styling section here is smart enough to know which mode are you configuring your app in and remembers those settings. So if you're configuring something for a desktop, which is the default, you configure everything as you normally would. If you're interested in configuring something for a mobile device, you can just click the mobile device and change the look and feel, the styling, etc. as well. Block properties, the visible properties, the legend visible, all of these you can control in exactly the same fashion. We only touch the visible, so again, I could make this chart hidden if I'm on mobile if I really wanted to. To do that, we go into functions, logical, double click the if statement. Go to the first item, go to constants, and we say, is this mobile? Then visible is going to be false. Otherwise, we want it to be true. Because I've selected the chart, you'll notice down the bottom here, we can actually have a lot more control over the actual component as well. Again, I can go into the legend of a chart and I can apply the same thing in here. So if we are on a mobile, I don't want the legend to be displayed. If we're on a desktop, I do want the legend to be displayed as well. The box, that is what we set the default for the actual Esri map here. But each different component in the block properties also has different options. So hide series on click, allow exports. So again, you can, anything that has a true or a false option in here, you can ask the same question and either enable or disable it from the mobile experience. While we're in that mode, the second area you can influence is on the block styling. Typically, the main items you want to edit and change in here will be around flex itself. Flex influences everything inside a container. That's why if I select a vertical stack layout, or even if I select this vertical stack layout, it'll affect everything that's inside that container. So if you want to adjust the flex layout, make sure you select the parent and then adjust your flex from there. At the same time, because we're in the different modes, you can also change your justification. You can align differently. You can also change how you want items to wrap. As soon as you reach the edge of the render space or the viewport, do you want the actual items to wrap underneath each other versus vanishing into the left or the right of the screen as well? There are different options in here on topography, decorations, and extra. Applies to the block styling as you are selecting the different modes that we're going through in here. So if I come back here, what are we trying to go through here? We're trying to make sure that when we put an app together, we create it from a responsive app perspective. Key item to ask whenever you put an app together is, who's the end audience? Who's the persona that's going to be consuming and interacting with the app? Is that audience mobile first? Is that audience tablet first? Or is that audience desktop first, or a combination? Second thing to consider is, for each of those different display modes, what UI elements make the most sense? Does it make sense to have a, for instance, grid all the way to a mobile device versus only presenting the information that is applicable? Or having a full 3D Unity rendering on a tablet that takes up 2/3 of the space, and you have to scroll all the way down to find what's important and relevant to view. So some of the key items to consider is really around, what information do we need to display on the different modes? And then using the visual responsive UI side, how can you configure those without having to configure different apps? Across the top, you have your 3 different modes. You have your tablet, you have your mobile device, and the default is to the desktop. Each of these 3 allows you to change the block styling that is applicable to that particular mode that you've selected. The other thing that you can do is, if you go into the block properties, you can start using the quick expressions along with the constant field, either is mobile or is desktop. You can use these in any of the expressions. We'll touch expressions and variables in a future lunch and learn as well, where you could use these in specific calculations or a lot more advanced UI configuration. For now, you can use them around displaying the visibility of components or enabling certain features on those components as well. Thank you for the time today and for attending our lunch and learn. If you've got any questions, please post them into the question section. We'll collate them afterwards, and we'll report them back for everyone to view as well. Thank you. Have a great day.